Take a moment. Settle in. This is going to take a while, and you need to listen carefully because the details matter. This is a story about a fisherman who disappeared in fog so thick you could barely see your own hands. It is a story about radios that kept transmitting after they should have gone silent. And it is a story about a coastal town that closes ranks when outsiders start asking questions. My name does not matter. What matters is that I spent 6 months reconstructing a timeline that law enforcement said was already closed. What matters is that I found contradictions in every official account, and that the more I pressed, the more the town pushed back. This case should have been simple. A missing person, bad weather, occupational hazard. But the evidence does not fit that story. And when evidence does not fit, you keep digging until you understand why. Let me start at the beginning. The town is called Greyport. It sits on a stretch of rugged coastline where the water is cold year-round and the fog rolls in thick most mornings. The population is small, maybe a few thousand permanent residents, and most of them are connected to the fishing industry in one way or another. Docks, processing plants, bait shops, marine supply stores. It is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and where newcomers are noticed immediately. The missing man was named Alan Driscoll, 46 years old, lifelong resident. He ran a small commercial fishing operation, just him and one deckhand, working lobster traps and gill nets depending on the season. Alan was known as reliable, quiet, not someone who took unnecessary risks. On the morning of March 8th, Alan left the harbour alone in his boat, a 32-foot commercial trawler called the Cormorant. Weather reports that day showed dense fog and moderate wind. Visibility was poor, but not unprecedented. Alan had fished in worse conditions. He was expected back by late afternoon. He did not return. By evening, his wife Sarah called the harbour master. The harbour master checked the radio logs and said Alan had checked in around noon, reported his position, and said he was heading back early because the fog was getting worse. That transmission was logged. It exists. But Alan never made it back to port. The Coast Guard launched a search the next morning. They found the Cormorant drifting 3 miles offshore, engine off, no one aboard. The boat was intact. No damage, no sign of struggle. The life raft was still secured. Alan's rain gear was hanging in the cabin. His wallet and keys were in a locker below deck. What they did not find was Alan. The official conclusion was straightforward. Alan likely went overboard in the fog, possibly while working the nets. The cold water and poor visibility would have made rescue impossible. The case was listed as a presumed drowning, accidental death, occupational hazard. That explanation held for about 2 weeks. Then someone started receiving radio transmissions on the same frequency Alan used. Transmissions that sounded like his voice. Transmissions that should not have been possible. That is when I got involved. I am a freelance investigative journalist. I specialize in cold cases and unresolved disappearances. A contact at a regional news outlet sent me a tip about the radio transmissions and suggested I look into it. At first, I assumed it was a hoax. Someone with a radio and too much time playing a cruel prank on a grieving family. But the more I learned, the less sense that explanation made. I arrived in Greyport on a grey morning in late April. The fog was so thick, I could barely see the road. I checked into a small motel near the harbour and started making calls. The first person I spoke to was Sarah Driscoll, Alan's wife. She agreed to meet me at a cafe near the docks. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hands wrapped around a coffee mug like she was trying to stay warm. I asked her about the radio transmissions. She said they started 2 weeks after Alan disappeared. Late at night, around 2 or 3 in the morning, she would hear the marine radio in their home office crackle to life. Static. Then, a voice. Alan's voice. He would say things like, "Position confirmed. Heading back. Visibility poor." The same phrases he used in his last official transmission. I asked if she recorded any of it. She nodded. She had 3 recordings on her phone. Short clips. 10, 15 seconds each. The voice quality was degraded, full of static, but it was unmistakably Alan. Same cadence, same phrasing. I asked if she reported it to the police. She said yes. They told her it was probably interference. Old transmissions bouncing off the atmosphere. A technical glitch. They said grief can make people hear things that are not there. But Sarah did not believe that, and neither did I. I spent the next 2 days talking to people in town. The harbour master, other fishermen, Alan's deckhand, a younger man named Kyle Brennan, the local police chief. Everyone gave me the same story. Alan was experienced. The weather was bad. He went overboard. Tragic, but not suspicious. But the details did not line up. Carl Brennan told me Alan never fished alone when fog was that thick. Alan always took him along, even if it meant splitting the catch. But on March 8th, Alan told Kyle to stay home. He said the trip was just a quick check on some traps, nothing worth 2 people. That was unusual. The harbour master showed me the radio logs. Alan checked in at 11,047 in the morning. He reported his position as approximately 12 miles northeast of the harbour. He said he was turning back because visibility was dropping fast. But here is the problem. When the Coast Guard found the cormorant, it was drifting 3 miles offshore, almost due west of the harbour. That is not the direction Alan said he was coming from. The boat should have been northeast. Instead, it was in the opposite area entirely. I asked the harbour master if that was noted in the official report. He said yes, but it was explained as drift. Currents and wind could have pushed the boat after Alan went overboard. Possible, but the engine was off. If Alan was heading back, why would he shut down the engine? No one had an answer for that. I asked to see the cormorant. The Coast Guard had towed it back to an impound dock behind the harbour office. It was still there, covered with a tarp, waiting for insurance processing. I convinced the harbour master to let me take a look. The boat was clean, too clean. Someone had hosed down the deck. I asked the harbour master if the Coast Guard did that. He said no. It came back from the search in that condition. I walked through the cabin. Everything was in place. Navigation equipment, radio, logbook. I opened the logbook. The last entry was dated March 7th, the day before Alan disappeared. Nothing for March 8th. That struck me as odd. Alan was meticulous about logging his trips. Every fisherman I talked to said the same thing. He logged everything. So why was there no entry for his final trip? I kept looking. Under the helm console, I found something the Coast Guard had missed. A small handheld GPS unit wedged between two cables. It was still powered on, but the battery was nearly dead. I pulled it out carefully. The screen showed a saved waypoint. Coordinates logged at 1:34 in the afternoon on March 8th. I wrote them down. When I checked those coordinates later on a marine chart, they placed the boat 16 miles south-southwest of the harbor. Not northeast, where Alan said he was. Not west, where the boat was found. South. That makes 3 different locations. The position Alan radioed, the position the GPS recorded, the position where the boat was found. None of them match. I started to feel the shape of something wrong. I went to the police station the next morning and asked to speak with Chief Raymond Cobb. He was in his mid-50s, graying hair, the kind of cop who has been in the same job for decades. He did not seem happy to see me. I explained what I had found, the GPS coordinates, the inconsistencies, the radio transmissions Sarah was receiving. He listened without interrupting. Then he said the case was closed. Alan Driscoll drowned. The evidence supported that conclusion. The GPS could have malfunctioned. The radio transmissions were atmospheric interference or equipment failure. There was no reason to reopen the investigation. I asked why the boat was so clean. He said the Coast Guard hosed it down to remove salt water before towing it back. Standard procedure. I asked why Alan did not log his trip. He said maybe Alan was in a hurry. Maybe he forgot. I asked why the boat drifted to a completely different area than Alan's stated position. He said currents and wind. Every answer felt rehearsed. I pressed. I said the family deserved more than assumptions. I said there were too many contradictions to call this resolved. Chief Cobb leaned back in his chair and looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "This is a small town. People here take care of their own. We do not need outsiders stirring up trouble over a tragedy that has already been explained. Alan Driscoll is gone. Let his family grieve in peace." It was not a suggestion. It was a warning. I left the station feeling watched. That night, I sat in my motel room and listened to the recordings Sarah had given me. 3 clips, each one the same. Alan's voice, static. Position confirmed. Heading back. Visibility poor. I played them over and over. And then I noticed something. In the second recording, there was a background sound. Faint, almost buried in the static. A rhythmic metallic clang, like a buoy bell or a channel marker. I checked the marine charts. There are no channel markers 16 miles offshore. The only markers are close to the harbor entrance. So where was that sound coming from? I made a decision. I needed to go to the coordinates the GPS had logged. I needed to see what was there. The problem was, I am not a fisherman. I do not own a boat. And no one in Greyport was going to rent one to a stranger asking questions about Alan Driscoll. I spent the next day trying to find someone willing to take me out. I offered cash. I explained I was working on a story. I promised I would not cause trouble. No one agreed. Finally, I found an older man named Eugene Marsh. He ran a bait and tackle shop near the north end of the docks. He was not a fisherman anymore, but he still kept a small boat for recreational trips. I explained what I was looking for. Eugene looked at me like I was out of my mind. He said, "You are asking me to take you 16 miles offshore in fog season to look at empty water?" I said yes. He shook his head. Then he said, "You know people are talking about you, saying you are here to make trouble, saying the chief wants you gone." I said I just wanted the truth. Eugene was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Alan was a good man. If something happened to him that was not an accident, someone should know." He agreed to take me out the next morning. We left the harbor just after dawn. The fog was moderate. Visibility maybe a quarter mile. Eugene's boat was small, a 20-foot center console with an outboard motor. He navigated by GPS, heading south-southwest. It took us almost an hour to reach the coordinates. When we arrived, there was nothing, just open water, light chop, seagulls circling. I scanned the surface, looking for anything unusual. Eugene cut the engine. We drifted. I asked him if there was anything in this area. Reefs, wrecks, fishing grounds. He said no. This area was too deep for most commercial fishing. No reason for anyone to be out here. So why did Alan's GPS log a waypoint here? I leaned over the side of the boat, looking down into the water. It was dark, opaque. I could not see more than a few feet below the surface. Then Eugene said, "Wait." He was staring at his fish finder. The sonar screen showed the bottom, about 200 feet down. But there was something else. A shape, large, suspended in the water column about 60 feet below the surface. Eugene adjusted the gain. The shape became clearer. It was not a fish. It was too big, too geometric. It looked like a submerged object. Metal, maybe. Hard to tell from sonar alone. Eugene said, "That should not be there." I asked what he thought it was. He shook his head. He said he had fished these waters for 40 years and never seen anything like that on sonar. We marked the position and took photos of the sonar screen. Then Eugene said we should head back. The fog was getting thicker, and he did not like the way the wind was shifting. On the way back, I asked Eugene if he knew anyone who could dive to that depth. He said maybe, but it would not be cheap, and it would not be safe. I said I would figure it out. When we got back to the harbor, I thanked Eugene and paid him double what we agreed on. He told me to be careful. He said, "People in this town do not like questions." I went back to my motel and started making calls. I needed a dive team. I needed someone with experience in deep water recovery. It took 2 days, but I found a small salvage company willing to do the job. They were based 2 hours up the coast. I explained what I needed. They said it would cost $5,000. I agreed. We scheduled the dive for 3 days later. In the meantime, I kept digging. I went to the library and looked through old newspaper archives. I wanted to know if there had been other disappearances in the area, other accidents, other unexplained events. What I found surprised me. Over the past 12 years, there had been 7 other incidents involving commercial fishing vessels near Greyport. 3 boats found abandoned, 2 fishermen missing and never recovered, 1 boat that sank in calm weather, 1 man who disappeared from his boat while it was tied to the dock. None of them were classified as suspicious. All of them were explained as accidents. But 7 incidents in 12 years seemed high for a town this small. I started pulling files on each case. I wanted names, dates, details. And then I noticed something. Every single incident involved fishermen who worked alone or in small, independent operations. No one from the larger commercial fleets. No one connected to the processing plants. Just small operators, like Alan. I made a list. I started reaching out to family members. Some of them did not want to talk. Some of them had moved away. But a few agreed to speak with me. One of them was a woman named Linda Carr. Her brother, Michael, disappeared 9 years ago. His boat was found drifting, just like Alan's. No body, no explanation. Linda told me the same thing Sarah had said. The police called it an accident, closed the case fast, told the family to move on. But Linda said Michael was experienced. He knew the water. He would not have made a careless mistake. I asked if Michael had ever mentioned anything unusual, anything that made him uneasy. Linda hesitated. Then she said, a few weeks before he disappeared, he told me he saw something out on the water, late at night, lights where there should not be any lights. He said he tried to radio it, but no one responded. I asked if he reported it. She said he did, to the harbour master, but nothing came of it. Lights where there should not be lights. I wrote that down. The dive was scheduled for the following morning. I met the salvage team at the harbour just after sunrise. 2 divers, a support crew, a boat with winch equipment. We headed out to the coordinates. The weather was clear, which was rare. Visibility was good. When we reached the site, the divers suited up. They carried underwater cameras and cutting tools in case they needed to free anything snagged. The descent took about 10 minutes. I watched the video feed from their helmet cameras on a monitor aboard the boat. The water was murky. Visibility dropped fast below 30 feet. By the time they reached 60 feet, it was almost black. Then the lights hit something. It was a cage. A large metal cage, approximately 8 feet on each side, suspended in the water by cables attached to a subsurface buoy system. The cage was empty, but the door was open. The divers circled it. One of them said, "This looks like a lobster trap, but way too big." I asked if they could see what the cables were attached to. They followed the cables down. About 20 feet below the cage, the cables were anchored to concrete blocks resting on the seafloor. The diver said, "Someone put this here intentionally. This is not debris. This is a setup." I asked them to check for markings, serial numbers, anything that could identify who built it. One of the divers examined the cage closely. He found a small metal tag welded to the frame. He wiped away algae and read the engraving aloud. It was a registration number, a commercial equipment ID. I wrote it down. The divers surfaced. We hauled the cage up using the winch. It took almost an hour. When we finally got it on deck, I examined it closely. The metal was corroded but intact. The door mechanism was intact. The cables were industrial grade. This was not something a recreational fisherman would use. This was professional equipment. I took photos. I tagged and documented everything. Then I called a contact I knew at the State Fisheries Department. I read them the registration number. They ran it through their database. The cage was registered to a company called Greyport Marine Services. I asked what kind of company that was. They said it was a marine supply and logistics company based in Greyport. They provided equipment and services to commercial fishing operations. I asked who owned it. They gave me a name, Raymond Cobb, the police chief. Everything stopped making sense and started making sense at the same time. I went back to Greyport that night. I did not go to the police station. I did not confront anyone. I went to the library and started pulling business records. Greyport Marine Services had been operating for 15 years. It was listed as a marine supply company, but the financial records were thin. Almost no public transactions, no major contracts. It looked like a shell. I cross-referenced the company with property records. Greyport Marine Services owned a warehouse near the industrial docks, away from the main harbour. I decided to take a look. I drove out there after midnight. The warehouse was dark. No cars, no lights. I parked a block away and walked up quietly. The building was old, corrugated metal siding, a large sliding door on the front, small windows near the roofline. I tried the door, locked. I walked around the perimeter. On the back side, I found a service door. It was unlocked. I hesitated. This was trespassing. If I got caught, I could be arrested. But I was too close to stop now. I went inside. The interior was cavernous, open floor space, high ceilings, a few floodlights mounted on the walls, but they were off. I used my phone flashlight. The space was mostly empty, except for stacks of equipment along the walls. Nets, buoys, cable spools. Nothing unusual. Then I saw the office in the back corner, a small enclosed room with a door and a window. I walked over. The door was unlocked. Inside, there was a desk, filing cabinets, a computer. I opened the filing cabinets. Most of the files were invoices, receipts, nothing interesting. Then I found a folder labeled Offshore Operations. I opened it. Inside were maps, marine charts marked with coordinates, dates, notes. Each map showed the same area, 16 miles south-southwest of the harbour. The same location where we found the cage. There were more than a dozen maps, each one marked with different dates going back years. Some had annotations, deployment successful, recovery delayed, equipment adjusted. I took photos of everything. Then I heard a sound outside. A car door closing. I turned off my phone light and moved to the window. Outside, 2 vehicles had pulled up. One was a police cruiser. The other was a dark SUV. Chief Cobb got out of the cruiser. 2 other men got out of the SUV. I did not recognize them, but they looked like crew. Work jackets, boots. They were walking toward the warehouse. I had maybe 30 seconds. I shoved the folder back into the cabinet, closed the drawer, and moved toward the back of the office. There was a second door leading deeper into the warehouse. I slipped through it and crouched behind a stack of cable spools. The front door slid open. Footsteps. Voices. Cobb said, "Check the inventory. We are moving everything offshore tomorrow night. I do not want any gaps." One of the men said, "What about the journalist?" Cobb said, "I will handle it. Just make sure everything is packed and ready." They moved around the warehouse, checking equipment. I stayed low, barely breathing. After about 10 minutes, they finished. The door slid shut. The vehicles drove away. I waited another 20 minutes before moving. Then I slipped out the back door and walked quickly to my car. My hands were shaking. I drove back to the motel and locked the door. I sat on the bed and tried to process what I had just seen. Raymond Cobb was running an operation offshore. Equipment deployment, recovery, coordination. And Alan Driscoll had found it. That was why his GPS logged those coordinates. That was why his boat was in the wrong place. That was why he disappeared. He was not supposed to be there, and someone made sure he did not come back. But I still did not understand what the operation was. What were they using the cage for? What were they moving offshore? I needed more. I needed to find out what they were deploying, and I needed to do it before they moved everything. Tomorrow night, Cobb had said. I had one day. I made a decision that night. I could not do this alone anymore. I needed help. Real help. I called a contact at the State Attorney General's office, a prosecutor I'd worked with on a previous investigation. Her name was Rachel Lindgren. She specialized in organized crime and corruption cases. I explained what I had found. The cage, the registration number, the warehouse, the offshore coordinates, the pattern of disappearances. Rachel listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You are describing a smuggling operation." I asked what kind. She said, "Could be drugs, could be weapons, could be people. If they are using submerged cages as dead drops or holding stations, they are moving something they do not want, detected by Coast Guard patrols or customs enforcement." I asked if she could get a warrant. She said not yet. Everything I had was circumstantial. No direct evidence linking Cobb to a crime. No proof that Alan's disappearance was anything other than an accident. I needed something concrete. I asked what that meant. She said, "You need to catch them in the act. You need documentation, video, audio, something that proves what they are doing." I said they were moving everything tomorrow night. She said, "Then you have one chance. But you need to be careful. If Raymond Cobb is running this operation, he has resources. He has authority. And he will not hesitate to protect it." I understood what she was not saying. I was at risk. But I had come too far to stop now. I spent the next day preparing. I rented a small inflatable boat with an outboard motor from a marina 2 towns over. I bought a waterproof camera and a handheld marine radio. I packed warm clothes, a flashlight, a knife, and a first aid kit. I told Eugene what I was planning. He tried to talk me out of it. He said it was too dangerous. He said I should let the authorities handle it. I told him the authorities were part of the problem. He shook his head. Then he gave me a handheld GPS unit and a flare gun. He said, if something goes wrong, fire the flare. Someone will see it. I thanked him. That evening, I drove to a quiet inlet about 2 miles north of Greyport Harbor. I launched the inflatable boat and motored out slowly, staying close to the coastline. The sun was setting. The fog was starting to roll in. I navigated by GPS toward the offshore coordinates. It took almost an hour. By the time I arrived, it was fully dark. I cut the engine and drifted. I could see lights in the distance. 2 vessels. One looked like a commercial fishing boat. The other was smaller, possibly a workboat. I stayed low and used binoculars to watch. The fishing boat was holding position near the coordinates. Floodlights illuminated the deck. I could see crew moving around. They were operating a winch, lowering something into the water. I pulled out the camera and started recording. The workboat circled slowly. Someone on the deck was using a handheld spotlight to scan the water. They were looking for something. A marker, maybe, or a buoy. Then I heard voices, faint, but clear enough to make out a few words. One voice said, "Depth is good. Lower it another 20 feet. Another voice said, "Confirm weight. We do not want it drifting." They were deploying something heavy, something anchored. I kept recording. The winch stopped. The crew secured the cables. Then the fishing boat started moving slowly, heading west. The workboat stayed behind. I waited. After about 10 minutes, the workboat's spotlight swept across the water. It stopped on a buoy, a small orange marker buoy, barely visible in the fog. Someone on the workboat leaned over the side and grabbed the buoy. They pulled up a rope attached to it, hand over hand, slow. Then they hauled something to the surface. A waterproof duffel bag, black, heavy. They pulled it aboard and opened it. I could not see what was inside from my distance, but I saw the reaction. One of the crew nodded. Another said something into a handheld radio. Then the workboat started moving, heading back toward shore. I waited until they were out of sight. Then I motored quietly toward the buoy. When I reached it, I grabbed the rope and pulled. It was heavy. Whatever they had attached below was still there. I hauled carefully. The rope was maybe 40 feet long. At the end, submerged just below the surface, was another duffel bag. I pulled it into the boat. It was sealed with heavy-duty clasps and a waterproof zipper. I opened it. Inside were plastic-wrapped bricks, dozens of them, each one stamped with a symbol I did not recognize. I pulled one out. It was dense, heavy. I cut the plastic carefully with my knife. White powder. This was not marijuana. This was not pills. This was something refined, probably cocaine or fentanyl. I sealed it back up and took photos. I documented everything. The bag, the bricks, the rope, the buoy. Then I heard an engine. I looked up. A boat was approaching fast, spotlights sweeping the water. They had seen me. I shoved the duffel bag back into the water, dropped the rope, and started my outboard motor. I opened the throttle and headed east, away from the shore. The spotlight locked onto me. The boat behind me accelerated. I could hear voices shouting. I could not make out the words, but the tone was clear. They were angry. I pushed the motor as hard as it would go. The inflatable boat bounced violently over the chop. Water sprayed into my face. I could barely see. The boat behind me was gaining. I reached for the handheld radio and switched it to channel 16, the emergency frequency. I keyed the mic and said, "This is a distress call. I am being pursued by an unknown vessel approximately 17 miles south-southwest of Greyport Harbor. I have evidence of criminal activity. I need immediate assistance." I repeated it twice. No response. The boat behind me was maybe 200 yards away now. I could see figures on the deck. One of them was holding something. A rifle, maybe. I changed course sharply, heading north. The inflatable boat tilted hard. I nearly lost my balance. Then I heard a crack, a sharp, echoing sound. They were shooting at me. I dropped low and kept the throttle open. Another shot. This one hit the water 10 feet to my left. I grabbed the flare gun Eugene had given me. I aimed it straight up and fired. The flare arced into the sky, burning bright red. It hung there for a moment, then started to fall. I hoped someone would see it. The boat behind me was closing fast, maybe 100 yards now. I could see the spotlight clearly. I could see the faces of the crew. One of them was Raymond Cobb. Then I heard another engine, a deeper sound, louder. I turned and saw lights approaching from the north. A large vessel, running lights, spotlight.
A Coast Guard cutter.
The boat behind me hesitated. The spotlight turned off. Then it veered sharply and accelerated away, heading west toward open water. The Coast Guard cutter pulled alongside me. A voice over a loudspeaker said, "Cut your engine. Identify yourself." I cut the engine. I raised my hands. A boarding team came over in a small launch. They secured my boat and helped me aboard the cutter. I was shaking, cold, soaked. An officer asked me what was happening. I told him everything. The smuggling operation, the cage, the duffel bags, the shooting. Raymond Cobb. He listened. Then he said, "We received your distress call. We were on patrol about 5 miles north. We saw the flare. I asked if they could catch the boat that was chasing me. He said they were trying. They had already radioed for backup. They brought me below deck and gave me a blanket and hot coffee. A senior officer took my statement. I showed him the photos on my camera, the cage, the maps, the duffel bag, the bricks. He said, "This is bigger than a local police matter. We are contacting federal agencies. DEA, FBI. You are going to need to repeat this statement multiple times." I said I understood. We stayed offshore for another 2 hours while the Coast Guard searched for the other boat. They did not find it. It had disappeared into the fog. Eventually, they brought me back to shore. Not to Greyport, to a Coast Guard station 30 miles up the coast. Federal agents were waiting. I spent the next 12 hours being interviewed. DEA, FBI, state police. I told the story over and over. I showed them the evidence. I gave them names, locations, dates. They asked if I was willing to testify. I said yes. They told me I was in danger. They said Raymond Cobb would know I had talked. They said I needed protection. I agreed to a safe location, temporary, until arrests were made. They moved me to a motel in a different county. 2 agents stayed with me around the clock. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then, on the 4th day, Rachel Lindgren called me. She said, "We have him. Cobb and 4 others. Federal arrest warrants. Conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. Racketeering. Obstruction of justice. They are in custody." I asked about the others, the crew, the fishing boat. She said 2 more arrests were pending. The boat had been seized. The offshore operation had been dismantled. I asked about Alan Driscoll. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We found evidence in Cobb's files. Alan saw the operation. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Cobb ordered his crew to intercept him. They forced him off his boat. He did not survive." I felt my throat tighten. She said his body was never recovered, but based on witness testimony from one of the crew members who is cooperating, Alan was weighted and dumped at sea. I asked if Sarah knew. She said yes, the family had been notified. I sat in silence for a long time after the call ended. Alan Driscoll was not careless. He was not unlucky. He was murdered because he saw something he was not supposed to see. And for weeks, the people responsible pretended it was an accident. The trial took almost a year to prepare. I testified in front of a grand jury. Then again, at the trial itself. Raymond Cobb was convicted on all counts: conspiracy to distribute fentanyl and cocaine, racketeering, obstruction of justice, murder. He was sentenced to life without parole. 4 other men were convicted alongside him, members of his crew. 2 received 20-year sentences. 2 received 15. The operation had been running for more than a decade. Cobb had used his position as police chief to monitor law enforcement activity and protect the smuggling routes. He controlled who investigated what. He closed cases that got too close. He silenced anyone who asked too many questions. Alan Driscoll was not the first person he killed. He was the 3rd. The other 2 were Michael Carr, the fisherman Linda told me about, and a man named Thomas Shipley, who disappeared 6 years before Alan. Both of them had seen the offshore operation. Both of them were eliminated. The radio transmissions Sarah heard were not ghosts. They were recordings. Cobb had kept copies of Alan's last transmission and replayed them on the same frequency late at night. It was psychological warfare, a way to make Sarah seem unstable, a way to discredit her if she kept pushing. It almost worked. I went back to Greyport once, about 6 months after the trial ended. I wanted to see Sarah. I wanted to see the town. It felt different, quieter. The docks were still there. The boats were still there. But something had changed. People knew the truth now. They knew what had been happening offshore. They knew their police chief had been a murderer. Some of them were angry. Some of them were ashamed. Some of them refused to believe it. I met Sarah at the same cafe where we first talked. She looked better, calmer. The dark circles under her eyes were gone. She thanked me. She said, "You gave me answers. You gave Alan justice. That is more than I thought I would ever get." I told her I was sorry it took so long. She said, "You did not give up. That is what matters." We sat in silence for a while. Then she said, "Do you think he knew at the end? Do you think he understood what was happening?" I did not know how to answer that. So I said, "I think he was brave. I think he tried to do the right thing. And I think he would be proud that the truth came out." She nodded. She did not cry. She just looked out the window at the docks. I left Greyport that afternoon, and I have not been back since. But I still think about Alan. I think about the radio, the fog, the cages hanging in the dark water. I think about how easy it is for a person to disappear, how easy it is for the truth to be buried under procedure and authority and silence. And I think about how close we came to never knowing what really happened. If Sarah had not kept pushing, if Eugene had not taken me offshore, if I had not gone to that warehouse, if the Coast Guard had not responded to the flare, any one of those things could have gone differently. And if they had, Raymond Cobb would still be the police chief of Greyport. The smuggling operation would still be running. And Alan Driscoll would still be just another fisherman who went overboard in the fog. That is how these things work. That is how the truth gets lost. Someone has to refuse to let it go. Someone has to keep asking questions, even when the answers are dangerous. I do not know if that makes me brave or reckless. Probably both. But I know this. The truth does not care if you are ready for it. It does not care if it is inconvenient or uncomfortable or frightening. It just is. And once you see it, you cannot look away. The case is closed now. The files are sealed. The trials are over. But I still have the recordings. I still have the photos. I still have the maps. And sometimes, late at night, I listen to Alan's voice on those recordings. Position confirmed. Heading back. Visibility poor. And I wonder what he saw out there in the fog. What he thought when he realized he was not alone. What he felt when they came for him. I wonder if he fought. I wonder if he was afraid. I will never know. But I know he mattered. I know his death was not an accident. I know the people responsible were held accountable. And I know that if I had not kept digging, none of that would be true. That has to be enough. The fog still rolls into Greyport most mornings. The boats still go out. The docks still creak in the wind. But the radios are quiet now. No more ghosts. No more transmissions from the dead. Just the sound of the water and the gulls, and the slow rhythm of a town trying to move forward. I think about Sarah sometimes. I wonder if she still lives in that house by the harbour. I wonder if she ever goes down to the docks. I hope she found peace. I hope she knows that Alan did not die for nothing. The ocean keeps its secrets. It always has. Bodies disappear. Evidence sinks. Currents scatter the pieces until nothing is left. But sometimes, if you look hard enough, if you refuse to accept the easy answers, you can pull something back from the depths. You can find the truth. And that truth, no matter how dark, no matter how painful, is worth finding. Because the alternative is silence. And silence protects the guilty. I learned that in Greyport. I learned that a closed case is not always a solved case. I learned that authority can be corrupt, that institutions can fail, that the people who are supposed to protect you can be the ones who hurt you most. But I also learned that ordinary people can be extraordinary, that a widow who refuses to let go can change everything, that a bait shop owner willing to take a risk can save a life, that a single flare in the darkness can bring help when you need it most. Those are the things I hold on to. Those are the things that keep me going when I start a new case. Because there are always more cases, always more disappearances, always more families waiting for answers. And someone has to be willing to dive into the cold water and pull the truth to the surface. Even when it is dangerous, even when it is terrifying, even when everyone tells you to stop. Especially then. That is the job. That is the promise I make every time I start an investigation. I will not stop until I know what happened. I will not stop until the truth is out. I will not stop until justice is served. No matter how long it takes, no matter how deep I have to dig, no matter who tries to stop me. Because the dead deserve to be remembered. The victims deserve to be heard. The families deserve to know. And the people responsible deserve to be held accountable. That is what I learned in Greyport. That is what I carry with me. Alan Driscoll went out on his boat one foggy morning, and he never came home. But his story did not end in the water. It ended in a courtroom with a guilty verdict and a life sentence. It ended with the truth. And that, in the end, is all any of us can hope for. The case of Alan Driscoll is closed. The investigation is over. The files are archived. But I will never forget him. I will never forget the sound of his voice on those recordings, the weight of the GPS unit in my hand, the cold metal of the cage rising from the water. I will never forget the moment I realized what had really happened to him. And I will never forget the responsibility that comes with knowing the truth. Because once you know, you cannot unknow. Once you see, you cannot unsee. The truth demands action. It demands courage. It demands that you stand up and speak, even when your voice shakes. That is what I did in Greyport. That is what I will keep doing. For Alan, for Sarah, for everyone who has ever been told to stop asking questions. The fog will always roll in. The ocean will always keep its secrets. But as long as there are people willing to search, willing to fight, willing to refuse the easy answers, the truth will come out. It always does. You just have to be brave enough to find it. I stayed away from investigative work for about 3 months after the Greyport trial ended. I told myself I needed a break. I told myself I needed to process everything that had happened. But the truth is, I was afraid. I had come close to dying on that water. I had been shot at, chased, threatened, And even though Raymond Cobb was in prison, even though the operation had been dismantled, I could not shake the feeling that I had gotten lucky. That next time, I might not. So I stayed home. I worked on smaller projects. I wrote articles about local politics and environmental issues, safe topics. Nothing that put me in danger. But the calls kept coming. Families with missing loved ones, journalists with leads on cold cases, attorneys who needed investigators. They all reached out because they had heard about Greyport. They had heard I was someone who did not give up. I ignored most of them. But one call I could not ignore. It came on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The caller ID showed a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. A woman's voice, quiet, hesitant. She said, "My name is Claire Voss. I am calling about my daughter. She has been missing for 6 weeks. The police say she ran away, but I know she did not. I know something happened to her, and I do not know who else to call." I asked her to tell me more. She said her daughter's name was Emily, 22 years old. College student. She had been living in an apartment near campus with 2 roommates. On the night of September 4th, Emily told her roommates she was going to meet someone. She left around 9 in the evening. She never came back. The roommates reported her missing the next day. The police investigated. They interviewed friends. They checked her phone records. They reviewed security footage from her apartment building. They found nothing suspicious. Emily's phone had been turned off shortly after she left the apartment. Her bank accounts had not been accessed. Her car was still in the parking garage. The detective assigned to the case concluded that Emily had likely left voluntarily, possibly to get away from academic pressure, possibly because of a relationship issue. He told Claire to wait. He said most missing adults turn up within a few weeks. 6 weeks later, Emily was still gone. Claire said, "I know my daughter. She would not do this. She would not disappear without telling me. She would not turn off her phone. She would not leave her car. Something is wrong." I asked if the police were still investigating. Claire said no. They had moved the case to inactive status. They said there was no evidence of foul play. They said Emily was an adult and had the right to leave if she wanted to. I asked if Claire had hired a private investigator. She said she had. 2 of them. Neither found anything. They said the same thing the police said. No evidence, no leads, nothing to follow. I asked why she was calling me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because everyone else has given up, and I cannot give up on my daughter." I told her I would think about it. I took her contact information and said I would call her back. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time. I thought about Greyport. I thought about Alan Driscoll. I thought about the families who had waited years for answers. And I thought about what Rachel Lindgren had said to me once. The truth does not care if you are ready for it. I called Claire back the next day and told her I would take the case. She sent me everything she had: police reports, phone records, bank statements, photos, emails, text messages, social media posts. I spent 2 days reading through it all. Emily Voss was a senior at a mid-sized state university. She was majoring in environmental science. Her grades were good. She had a part-time job at a campus coffee shop. She had friends. She had hobbies. She posted regularly on social media. Nothing in her profile suggested someone planning to disappear. The last text message she sent was to her roommate at 8:47 in the evening on September 4th. It said, "Heading out. Be back later." Her phone was pinged by a cell tower near campus at 9,003. Then, it went offline. Security footage from her apartment building showed Emily leaving at 8,052. She was wearing jeans, a dark jacket, and a backpack. She walked out the front door and turned left toward the street. The footage from the next block showed her walking alone. No one following her. No one approaching her. Then she disappeared off camera. The police had canvassed the area. They checked businesses with security cameras. They checked traffic cameras. They found nothing. Emily had simply vanished. I started with the roommates. Their names were Jessica Marin and Tara Yuen. Both were seniors. Both had known Emily since freshman year. I called Jessica first. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near campus. Jessica was nervous. She kept looking around like she expected someone to be listening. I asked her to tell me about the night Emily disappeared. She said Emily had seemed normal that day. They had all been in the apartment together in the afternoon. Emily was working on a research paper. Around 8 in the evening, Emily got a text message. She looked at her phone, then said she needed to go meet someone. I asked who. Jessica said Emily did not say. She just said it was important. I asked if that was unusual. Jessica hesitated. Then she said, "A little." Emily usually told us where she was going, but that night she was kind of vague. I asked if Emily seemed upset or scared. Jessica said no. She seemed focused, like she had something she needed to do. I asked if Jessica saw the text message. She said no. Emily kept her phone turned away. I asked if Emily took anything with her besides the backpack. Jessica said she did not know. Emily had packed the backpack in her room. I asked what was in the backpack when it was found. Jessica said it was not found. She had it with her when she left. That was new information. The police report had not mentioned a backpack. I asked Jessica if she told the police about it. She said yes. They said it was not important. I made a note of that. Next, I talked to Tara. She told me the same story. Emily left around 9. She did not say where she was going. She had her backpack. I asked Tara if Emily had been acting differently in the days before she disappeared. Tara thought about it. Then she said, maybe a little. She was quieter than usual. She spent a lot of time on her laptop. I asked what she was doing. Tara said she did not know. Emily always closed her laptop when someone came into the room. I asked if Tara thought Emily was in trouble. Tara said, I do not know, but I think she was worried about something. I thanked her and moved on to the next lead. Emily's phone records showed that she had received a text message at 8,014 on the night she disappeared. The message came from a number that was not in her contacts. I called the number. It was disconnected. I I ran the number through a reverse lookup service. It came back as a prepaid burner phone. No registered owner. That was significant. Someone had contacted Emily from an untraceable number shortly before she disappeared. I checked her call log. In the week before she vanished, Emily had made several calls to a local number. The calls were short, 2 or 3 minutes each. I looked up the number. It belonged to a business called Everett Consulting Group. I had never heard of it. I searched online. Everett Consulting Group had a website, but it was bare. Just a homepage with a contact form. No information about what they did. No staff directory. No client list. I called the number. It rang 4 times, then went to a generic voicemail. I left a message saying I was trying to reach someone who had been in contact with Emily Voss. No one called back. I decided to visit the address listed on the website. It was in a commercial district about 20 minutes from campus. When I arrived, I found a small office building, 3 stories, older construction. The directory in the lobby listed Everett Consulting Group on the 2nd floor, Suite 204. I took the stairs. Suite 204 was at the end of a narrow hallway. The door was unmarked except for the suite number. I knocked. No answer. I tried the handle. Locked. I looked through the small window in the door. The office was empty. No furniture. No equipment. Nothing. It looked like it had been abandoned. I went back downstairs and found the building manager. I asked how long Everett Consulting Group had been there. He checked his records. He said they leased the space in July, paid 3 months up front. The lease ended last week and they did not renew. I asked if he knew what kind of business it was. He said no, they kept to themselves, rarely saw anyone coming or going. I asked if he had contact information for whoever signed the lease. He said he would have to check. He gave me his card and told me to call back in a day or 2. I left feeling uneasy. Emily had been calling a business that did not seem to exist, and that business had closed shortly after she disappeared. That was not a coincidence. I went back to Emily's social media. I wanted to see if she had posted anything about Everett Consulting, or anything that might explain why she was calling them. Her last post was on September 3rd, the day before she disappeared. It was a photo of a sunset taken from campus. The caption said, "Sometimes you have to trust that things will work out." I scrolled back further. Most of her posts were typical college content. Photos with friends, study sessions, weekend trips. But in late August, there was a post that stood out. It was a photo of a newspaper article. The headline read, "Local Environmental Group Challenges Development Project." The caption said, "Important work happening right here. Proud to support this." I clicked on the article. It was about a grassroots environmental organization called Clean Rivers Coalition. They were opposing a large commercial development on the outskirts of the city. The development would involve clearing forested wetlands and building a distribution center. The coalition argued that the project violated environmental protections and would cause irreversible harm to local ecosystems. I searched for more information about the coalition. They had a website, a Facebook page, a list of upcoming events. I found a contact email and sent a message explaining that I was investigating Emily's disappearance and wanted to know if she had been involved with their work. I got a response within an hour. The email was from a woman named Karen Delgado. She said Emily had volunteered with the coalition over the summer. She had helped with research and outreach. Karen said Emily was passionate and dedicated. I asked if Emily had been working on anything specific before she disappeared. Karen said she was helping us investigate the company behind the development project. We suspected they were using shell companies to hide their financial connections. Emily was good with research. She found some things that concerned us. I asked what kind of things. Karen said financial irregularities, permits that did not match the project plans, names that kept appearing in different corporate filings. She was putting together a report. I asked if Karen still had the report. She said no. Emily had been working on it on her own laptop. She was supposed to present it to the coalition in mid-September, but she disappeared before she could finish. I asked if the police knew about this. Karen said, I told them. They said it was not relevant. I asked for the name of the company behind the development project. Karen said Cascade Ridge Development, but they are owned by a parent company called Tiernan Holdings, and Tiernan is connected to a dozen other subsidiaries. It is a maze. I wrote it all down. Then Karen said, there is something else. About a week before Emily disappeared, she told me she had found a connection. She said she thought Tiernan Holdings was involved in something illegal. She would not tell me what. She said she needed to confirm it first. I asked if she knew how Emily was planning to confirm it. Karen said she mentioned meeting with someone, a source. She did not say who. A source, a meeting. The text message at 8014. The untraceable number. Emily had gone to meet someone who could confirm what she had found. And she never came back. I spent the next 2 days digging into Tiernan Holdings. It was exactly what Karen had described. A maze of subsidiaries and shell companies. Addresses that led to empty offices. Corporate filings that listed people who did not seem to exist. But I found a pattern. Every subsidiary under Tiernan Holdings had been registered in the past 5 years. All of them were involved in real estate development or logistics, and all of them had one thing in common. A law firm called Brennan and Associates handled their legal filings. I looked up Brennan and Associates. They were a mid-sized firm specializing in corporate law. Their website listed a dozen attorneys. One name caught my attention. Kyle Brennan. The same Carl Brennan who had been Alan Driscoll's deckhand in Greyport. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. It could be a coincidence. Brennan is not an uncommon name, but the timing felt wrong. I called Rachel Lindgren. I told her what I had found. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Kyle Brennan testified at the Greyport trial. He was granted immunity in exchange for cooperation. After the trial, he moved. We lost track of him. I asked if she knew where he went. She said, no, but I can find out. Give me a few hours. She called me back that evening. She said, "Carl Brennan is living under his real name. He is working as a paralegal at Brennan and Associates, same city where Emily disappeared, same firm that handles filings for TNN Holdings." I asked if that was legal. She said, "Technically, yes. His immunity agreement did not restrict where he could live or work. But it is suspicious. If he is involved in something, we need proof." I asked what kind of proof. She said, "You need to connect him to Emily's disappearance. You need to show that TNN Holdings had a reason to silence her. And you need to do it carefully, because if Carl realizes you are onto him, he will disappear again." I understood. I started by building a timeline. Emily had been researching TNN Holdings throughout August. She found something that concerned her in early September. She contacted someone, possibly through Everett Consulting, to confirm what she found. On September 4th, she received a text message from a burner phone and left to meet someone. She never came back. Everett Consulting had closed its office shortly after. Carl Brennan worked for the firm that represented TNN Holdings. The pieces were starting to fit together. But I still did not know what Emily had found. I did not know why it was worth killing her. And I did not know where she was. I needed to get inside Brennan and Associates. I needed to see their files. I needed to find out what they were hiding. But I could not just walk in and ask. I needed a plan. I spent the next week preparing. I created a fake identity, a shell company, a reason to need legal services. Then I called Brennan and Associates and requested a consultation about corporate filings for a new business venture. They scheduled me for the following Tuesday. When I arrived, I was greeted by a receptionist who led me to a small conference room. A young attorney came in a few minutes later. He introduced himself as Mark Halloran. He asked about my business needs. I gave him a prepared story. I said I was starting a logistics company and needed help setting up the corporate structure. I mentioned that I had heard Brennan and Associates had experience with similar companies. He said they did. He asked for more details. I kept the conversation going for about 20 minutes. Then I asked if I could use the restroom. He pointed me down the hall. I walked slowly, scanning the office, nameplates on doors, file cabinets, workstations. I found Carl Brennan's office. The door was open. He was not there. I glanced back down the hall. No one was watching. I stepped inside. His desk was cluttered with papers, file folders, sticky notes. I took photos quickly with my phone. I did not have time to read anything in detail. Then I saw a folder labeled Everett Consulting Group. I opened it. Inside were contract documents, correspondence, financial records. Everett Consulting was not a real business. It was a front, a way for TNN Holdings to funnel money and coordinate activities without leaving a direct paper trail. And Carl Brennan had been managing it. I took photos of every page. Then I heard footsteps in the hall. I closed the folder and stepped out of the office, moving quickly back toward the conference room. Mark was waiting for me. He did not seem suspicious. I finished the consultation, thanked him, and left. Once I was back in my car, I reviewed the photos. Everett Consulting had been used to pay people for various services: security, research, logistics coordination. The payments were vague, no detailed descriptions, just dollar amounts and dates. One payment stood out: $5,000, dated September 3rd. The memo line said, "Source consultation and materials retrieval." The day before Emily disappeared, someone had been paid to meet with a source and retrieve materials. I thought Emily was the source, but what if she was not? What if Emily was trying to meet with a source, and that source was the one who was paid? What if Emily walked into a trap? I called Rachel. I sent her the photos. I explained what I had found. She said, "This is enough for a warrant. I am contacting the FBI. They will want to move fast." I asked what I should do. She said, "Stay away from Kyle Brennan. Stay away from Tiernan Holdings. Let the federal agents handle it. You have done your part." But I could not let it go. Not yet. Because I still did not know where Emily was. If she was dead, I needed to find her body. If she was alive, I needed to find her before it was too late. I went back to the timeline. Emily received a text at 8,014. She left at 8,052. Her phone pinged near campus at 9,003, then went offline. Where did she go? I pulled up a map. I marked her apartment. I marked the cell tower that pinged her phone. I drew a radius. Within that radius, there were several locations: a park, a parking garage, a few office buildings, an industrial area near the river. I decided to check the industrial area first. I drove out there that evening. The area was quiet: abandoned warehouses, empty lots, chain link fences. I parked and walked along the perimeter. I was looking for anything unusual: tire tracks, disturbances in the gravel, signs of recent activity. Then I saw a warehouse with a newer lock on the door. The building looked old, but the lock was shiny, recently installed. I walked around the building. On the back side, I found a window. It was covered with plywood, but one corner had come loose. I pried it open and climbed inside. The interior was dark. I used my phone flashlight. The warehouse was mostly empty. Concrete floor, metal support beams, dust and debris. But in the back corner, there was a section that had been partitioned off with plastic sheeting. I walked toward it slowly. Behind the sheeting, there was a small enclosed area: a chair, a table, rope on the floor, and a backpack. I knelt down and opened it. Inside were textbooks, a laptop, a wallet. The wallet had Emily's student ID. I stood up, heart pounding. Emily had been here. I took photos. I documented everything. Then I called Rachel. I said, "I found where they held her. I am sending you the location. You need to get forensics out here now." She said, "Get out of there. Do not touch anything else. We are sending a team." I left the warehouse and waited in my car. Within an hour, federal agents and local police arrived. They secured the scene. They processed the evidence. They took my statement. One of the agents told me they found blood on the floor. Not much, but enough for DNA testing. They found fingerprints. They found fibers. They found tire tracks outside. And they found something else. A burner phone tucked under the chair. The phone had one text message in the sent folder. It was sent to Emily's number at 8014 on September 4th. The message said, "Meet me at the old industrial site near the river. I have the files you need. Come alone." The trap had been set. Emily walked into it, and she never walked out. The FBI arrested Kyle Brennan the next morning. They arrested 3 other men connected to Tiernan Holdings. All of them refused to talk. But forensics did the talking for them. DNA from the warehouse matched Kyle Brennan. The tire tracks matched a vehicle registered to one of the other men. The burner phone had been purchased using a credit card linked to Everett Consulting. The evidence was overwhelming. But still, no one would say where Emily was. I spent the next 2 weeks searching. I went back to the river. I walked the trails. I searched the woods. Nothing. Then, on a cold morning in late November, a jogger found a body in a ravine 3 miles from the warehouse. It was Emily. The medical examiner determined she had been dead since early September. Cause of death was blunt force trauma. She had been killed shortly after she was taken to the warehouse, then dumped in the ravine. Claire Voss identified the body. I was with her when she did. I will never forget the sound she made. A low, broken cry that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. I had found her daughter, but I had not saved her. Emily had been dead for weeks before I even took the case. The trial happened 8 months later. Kyle Brennan and the 3 other men were charged with kidnapping and murder. The prosecution laid out the case. Emily had discovered that Tiernan Holdings was involved in illegal dumping of industrial waste, toxic chemicals, hazardous materials. They had been disposing of it in the wetlands they were supposed to be protecting. Emily had found documentation, emails, financial records, shipping manifests. She was going to expose them. So they lured her to the warehouse. They tried to get her to tell them where she had hidden the files. When she refused, they killed her. But Emily had been smart. She had uploaded the files to a secure cloud server before she went to meet them. The FBI recovered everything. The evidence was damning. Tiernan Holdings had been dumping toxic waste for years. They had bribed inspectors. They had falsified environmental reports. They had endangered public health for profit. All 4 men were convicted. Kyle Brennan received life without parole. The others received sentences ranging from 30 to 50 years. Tiernan Holdings was dissolved. The executives were charged. The development project was shut down. Emily's research brought down an entire criminal operation. But she did not live to see it. I think about that sometimes. I think about how close she came. If she had waited one more day. If she had gone to the authorities first. If she had told someone where she was going. But she did not. She went alone. She trusted the wrong person. And she paid for it with her life. That is the reality of this work. Sometimes the truth comes too late. Sometimes you find answers, but you do not get justice in time to save anyone. I stayed in touch with Claire after the trial. She thanked me. She said I gave her closure. But I am not sure closure is the right word. Her daughter is still gone. The pain is still there. The loss is still unbearable. What I gave her was the truth, the knowledge of what happened, the certainty that the people responsible were punished. That is all I could do. And maybe, in the end, that is all any of us can do. We can search. We can fight. We can refuse to accept easy answers. But we cannot change the past. We cannot bring back the dead. We can only make sure their stories are told, their lives are remembered, their deaths are not in vain. Emily Voss was 22 years old. She was smart. She was brave. She cared about the world and wanted to make it better. And she was killed for it. That is the truth. After the Emily Voss case closed, I told myself I would take a real break this time. Not just a few weeks, months, maybe longer. I had been doing this work for almost 5 years. Cold cases, missing persons, families desperate for answers, and every single case took something from me. Greyport took my sense of safety. Emily Voss took something harder to name. A piece of hope, maybe. The belief that if you work fast enough, if you are smart enough, you can save someone. I could not save Emily. I could only find her body and make sure her killers paid. That started to feel like all I ever did. Find bodies, document violence, testify at trials. I was tired. So I rented a cabin in the mountains. No cell service, no internet, just woods and quiet and time to think. I stayed there for 6 weeks. I hiked. I read. I sat on the porch and watched the light change through the trees. And slowly, the tightness in my chest started to ease. I started to remember why I had gotten into this work in the first place. Not because I wanted to see the worst of humanity, but because I believed that the truth mattered, that every person who disappeared deserved to be searched for, that every family deserved answers. I believed that then, and I still believed it now. But I also knew I could not keep doing this alone. I could not keep taking every case. I could not keep carrying all of it by myself. I needed help. I needed a team. I needed people I could trust. When I came back from the cabin, I started making calls. The first person I contacted was Eugene Marsh, the man from Greyport who had taken me offshore to find the submerged cage. Eugene had retired from fishing, but he still knew boats. He still knew the water, and he was someone I trusted completely. I asked if he would be willing to work with me on future cases that involved maritime elements. Search and recovery, coastal investigations, anything that required someone who understood the ocean. He said yes without hesitation. The second person was a forensic analyst named Dr. Lisa Tran. I had worked with her on the Emily Voss case. She was meticulous, brilliant, and she had a way of finding evidence that other people missed. I asked if she would be willing to consult on cases where forensic analysis was critical. She said she would, as long as it did not conflict with her work at the State Crime Lab. The third person was Rachel Lindgren. She was still a prosecutor at the Attorney General's office, but she agreed to serve as a legal advisor. She would help me navigate jurisdictional issues. She would make sure I did not cross any lines that would jeopardize cases in court. With those three people, I had the foundation of something real. Not just me working alone in motel rooms and taking reckless risks. An actual team. We called it the Independent Cold Case Initiative, ICCI for short. We set up a small office. Nothing fancy, just a shared workspace with desks and file cabinets and a secure server for case files. And we started taking cases. The first case that came to us after we formalized the team was different from anything I had worked on before. It came from a man named Garrett Cross. He was in his early 60s, retired military. He contacted us through the email address we had set up on our website. His message was brief. I need help finding my brother. He disappeared 30 years ago. The police never solved it. I think I know who killed him, but I cannot prove it. Can you help? I called him the next day. Garrett's voice was steady, controlled. He had the kind of composure that comes from years of discipline, but underneath it, I could hear the weight he was carrying. He told me his brother's name was Daniel Cross. Daniel was 19 years old when he disappeared in the spring of 1993. He was a freshman at a small liberal arts college about 2 hours from where his family lived. On the night of April 10th, Daniel left his dorm room to go to the library. He never came back. His roommate reported him missing the next morning. The police searched the campus. They searched the surrounding area. They interviewed students and faculty. They found nothing. No witnesses, no evidence, no leads. Daniel's car was still in the campus parking lot. His wallet and keys were in his dorm room. His backpack was gone, but no one knew what he had been carrying in it. The case went cold. Garrett said he had spent the last 30 years trying to find out what happened to his brother. He had talked to everyone who knew Daniel. He had reviewed the police files. He had hired private investigators. Nothing worked. But recently, something had changed. Garrett said, a few months ago, I got a letter. It was anonymous. No return address. Just a single page. It said, Daniel Cross did not disappear. He was killed. And the person who killed him still lives on that campus. I asked if he still had the letter. He said yes. He would send me a copy. I asked if he had shown it to the police. He said he had. They told him it was probably a hoax. Someone trying to stir up old pain. They said there was no new evidence to justify reopening the case. Garrett did not believe that. He said, someone knows what happened, and after 30 years, they are finally ready to talk. But they are afraid. That is why they sent the letter anonymously. That is why they need someone from outside to investigate. I told him we would look into it. He sent me everything he had. Police reports, witness statements, photos, news articles, and the letter. The letter was typed on plain white paper. No signature. No identifying marks. The postmark was from a city about 50 miles from the college. The message was short. Daniel Cross did not disappear. He was killed. And the person who killed him still lives on that campus. I read it several times. Someone was reaching out. someone who knew something, but they were too afraid to come forward directly. That meant the person responsible had power, influence, a reason people stayed silent. I shared the case files with the team. We met in the office to go over everything. Dr. Tran reviewed the police reports. She said, there was no physical evidence recovered at the time, no forensics, no DNA. They did not even have fingerprinting technology sophisticated enough to process most of what they collected. If we are going to solve this, it will not be through forensics. It will be through witness testimony and timeline reconstruction. Eugene asked, do we know where Daniel was going that night, specifically? I checked the files. The roommate said Daniel had mentioned going to the library to work on a paper, but there was no record of Daniel entering the library. The library kept a logbook at the front desk where students signed in. Daniel's name was not in it for that night. Rachel said, so he told his roommate he was going to the library, but he never made it there. Either he changed his mind or he lied about where he was going. I said, or someone intercepted him before he got there. We needed to go to the campus. We needed to walk the route Daniel would have taken. We needed to talk to people who had been there in 1993. The college was called Ashford College. It was a small school. Enrollment was around 1,500 students. The campus was in a rural area, surrounded by woods and farmland. I drove out there on a grey afternoon in early December. The campus was quiet. Finals were approaching. Students walked quickly between buildings, heads down against the cold. I went to the administrative office and explained that I was investigating the disappearance of Daniel Cross. I asked if I could speak to someone who had been employed by the college in 1993. The woman at the desk said most of the faculty and staff from that time had retired or moved on, but there was one person still there, a professor named Dr. Harold Weston. He had been teaching history at Ashford since 1987. She gave me his office number. I called and asked if I could meet with him. He agreed. Dr. Weston's office was in an old brick building on the north side of campus. The hallway smelled like old paper and floor polish. I knocked on the door marked with his name. A voice said, "Come in." Dr. Weston was in his 70s. White hair, glasses, a cardigan sweater. He sat behind a desk piled with books and papers. He gestured for me to sit. I explained why I was there. He nodded slowly. He said, "I remember Daniel Cross. I did not teach him, but I remember when he disappeared. It was a terrible thing. The whole campus was shaken." I asked if he remembered anything unusual about that time, anything that stood out. He thought for a moment. Then he said, "There was a lot of tension that spring. Daniel's disappearance was not the only troubling incident. There had been complaints about harassment, about a professor who had inappropriate relationships with students. It was all very hushed. The administration did not want it to become public." I leaned forward. I asked, "Do you remember the professor's name?" He hesitated. Then he said, "Kenneth Pryor. He taught sociology. He was very popular with students, charismatic. But there were rumors. Some students said he had crossed boundaries, asked them to meet him outside of class, made them uncomfortable." I asked what happened to him. Dr. Weston said he left the college at the end of that semester, May 1993. The official reason was that he accepted a position elsewhere, but most of us suspected he was pushed out quietly. The administration did not want a scandal. I asked if anyone connected Kenneth Pryor to Daniel's disappearance. Dr. Weston said, "Not that I know of, but I always wondered. The timing seemed strange. Daniel disappeared in April, Pryor left in May, and the whole thing was swept under the rug very quickly." I asked if Dr. Weston knew where Kenneth Pryor had gone. He said, "I heard he moved out west somewhere. I do not know where exactly, but I imagine you could find him if you looked." I thanked him and left. Back in the car, I called Rachel. I told her about Kenneth Pryor. She said, "I will run a background check, see what I can find." It took her 2 days. Kenneth Pryor was now 68 years old. He had left Ashford College in 1993 and moved to Arizona. He taught at a community college there for a few years, then retired. He was currently living in a small town outside of Tucson. There was something else. In 1998, Pryor had been accused of sexual misconduct by a student at the community college. The case was settled out of court. The terms were confidential. Rachel said, "This guy has a pattern, and if he was involved in Daniel's disappearance, he has been getting away with it for 30 years. I said, "I am going to Arizona." Rachel said, "Be careful. If he knows you are coming, he might run, or worse." I flew to Tucson the next week. I rented a car and drove out to the town where Pryor lived. It was a quiet place. Desert, cactus, low houses with gravel yards. I found Pryor's address, a small ranch-style house at the end of a dirt road. I parked a block away and watched for a while. I saw movement inside. Someone was home. I walked up to the front door and knocked. A man answered. He was tall, grey hair, glasses. He looked at me with a neutral expression. I said, "Kenneth Pryor?" He said, "Yes. Can I help you?" I introduced myself. I said I was investigating the disappearance of Daniel Cross from Ashford College in 1993. I said I wanted to ask him a few questions. His expression did not change. He said, "I have nothing to say about that." I said, "Daniel Cross disappeared a month before you left the college. I think you knew him. I think you know what happened to him." Pryor said, "You need to leave." I said, "I am not leaving until you talk to me. If you refuse, I will go to the police. I will go to the media. I will make sure everyone knows your name and your history." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. He said, "You have 5 minutes." I went inside. The house was neat, sparsely furnished. Bookshelves lined one wall. A desk in the corner with a computer. Pryor sat down in a chair by the window. He did not offer me a seat. He said, "I did not kill Daniel Cross." I said, "Then tell me what happened." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Daniel was one of my students. Sociology 101. He was bright, engaged. We talked after class sometimes. He asked good questions." I said, "And?" Pryor said, He came to my office one night, late. He said he needed to talk to me about something. He said he had discovered something on campus, something he thought was wrong. He wanted my advice. I asked, what did he discover? Pryor hesitated. Then he said there was a group of students involved in hazing. Serious hazing, not just pranks. Dangerous stuff. Physical abuse. Psychological manipulation. Daniel found out about it. He wanted to report it. I said, why did not he? Pryor said, because the students involved were connected. Wealthy families. Influential alumni. Daniel was afraid that if he reported it, nothing would happen to them. That he would be the one who suffered consequences. I said, so what did you tell him? Pryor said, I told him he should go to the administration anyway. I told him I would support him. But I also warned him that it might not end the way he hoped. I said, and then what happened? Pryor looked at the floor. He said, a few days later, Daniel disappeared. And I realized I had been naive. I had underestimated how far those students would go to protect themselves. I said, you think they killed him? Pryor said, I do not know, but I think they did something, and I think the administration helped cover it up. I said, why did you leave? He said, because I was told to. The dean called me into his office. He said there were complaints about me, inappropriate conduct. He said if I resigned quietly, the complaints would go away. If I refused, they would pursue formal charges. I said, and you just left? He said, I had no choice. They had power. I did not. So I left. And I have lived with that decision every day since. I asked, who were the students involved in the hazing? Pryor said, I do not know all their names, but the leader was a student named Carter Ashford. His family were major donors to the college. His grandfather was on the board of trustees. I wrote that down. I asked, did you ever tell the police any of this? Pryor said, no. I was afraid. I thought if I said anything, they would come after me, ruin my career, maybe worse. I said, someone sent a letter to Daniel's brother, an anonymous letter saying Daniel was killed, and that the person responsible still lives on campus. Pryor looked surprised. He said, I did not send that letter. I believed him. I said, but someone did. Someone who knows the truth. Someone who has been carrying it for 30 years. Pryor said, if Carter Ashford is still there, you should talk to him. But be careful. His family has a long reach. I left Arizona the next day and flew back home. I contacted the college again. I asked if Carter Ashford was still affiliated with the institution. The answer surprised me. Carter Ashford was not just affiliated, he was the dean of students. He had been in that position for 12 years. The person potentially responsible for Daniel's death was now one of the most powerful administrators on campus. I called Rachel and told her. She said, that explains why the case was never solved. Ashford had every reason to bury it, and he had the authority to do it. I said, how do we get to him? She said carefully, if we accuse him without proof, he will destroy us. We need leverage. We need someone who is there, someone who will talk. I thought about the anonymous letter. Someone knew. Someone was ready to talk, but afraid to come forward. I decided to go back to the campus and start asking questions. I spent 3 days at Ashford College. I talked to staff. I talked to faculty. I asked if anyone remembered the spring of 1993. If anyone remembered Daniel Cross. Most people did not, or they said they did not. But one person did. Her name was Margaret Lyle. She worked in the campus library. She had been there since 1989. I found her shelving books in the reference section. I introduced myself and asked if she remembered Daniel Cross. She stopped shelving and looked at me. She said, "Yes, I remember." I asked if she would talk to me. She looked around. Then she said, "Not here. Meet me after my shift. There is a diner in town. I will be there at 6. I met her at the diner that evening. We sat in a booth in the back. Margaret was in her 60s. She had worked at the library for more than 30 years. She said, "I saw Daniel the night he disappeared." I leaned forward. I said, "Tell me." She said, "He came to the library around 8:30, but he did not sign in. He went around to the side entrance, the one near the staff offices. I saw him through the window. He looked nervous, like he was trying not to be seen." I asked, "Did he meet someone?" She said yes, a student. I did not see his face clearly, but they talked for a few minutes. Then they left together, toward the woods behind the library. I asked, "Did you tell the police this?" She said, "I tried, but when I gave my statement, the detective cut me off. He said the side entrance was not relevant. He said I must have been mistaken about the time." I asked, "Why would he do that?" Margaret said, "I did not understand it then, but later I heard rumors. People said the administration had pressured the police to drop the investigation. They said it was bad for the college's reputation. They said it would hurt enrollment." I asked, "Do you know who the student was? The one Daniel met?" She hesitated. Then she said, "I saw him again, a few weeks later. I recognized his jacket, a blue varsity jacket with the letter A on the back." I asked around. Someone told me it was Carter Ashford. There it was, the connection. Daniel had met Carter Ashford the night he disappeared, and Margaret had witnessed it. I asked, "Why are you telling me this now?" She said, "Because I am tired of being silent. I have carried this for 30 years. I sent the letter to Daniel's brother because I thought maybe someone from outside could finally do something. The police would not listen. The administration would not listen. But maybe you would." I said, "You sent the letter?" She nodded. She said, "I am ready to tell the truth, whatever it takes." I contacted Rachel immediately. I told her about Margaret's testimony. Rachel said, "That is enough for the police to reopen the case. But we need to move fast. If Ashford finds out we have a witness, he will try to intimidate her. Or worse." We coordinated with state police. They agreed to reopen the investigation based on Margaret's statement. They brought Carter Ashford in for questioning. He denied everything. He said he did not remember meeting Daniel Cross. He said he had no knowledge of any hazing incidents. He said the accusations were baseless. But under pressure, his story started to fall apart. The police searched his office on campus. They found old records, emails, files that had been stored on a server for decades and never deleted. One email, dated April 9th, 1993, was from Carter Ashford to another student. It said, "We have a problem. Cross is going to report us. We need to handle it before he talks." The next day, Daniel disappeared. The police arrested Carter Ashford. They charged him with murder. He hired expensive lawyers. He fought the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. Margaret testified. Kenneth Pryor testified. Other students who had been part of the hazing group were tracked down. Some of them agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. The full story came out. Daniel Cross had discovered that Carter Ashford and a group of other students were running a brutal hazing operation. They were targeting freshmen, forcing them into dangerous situations, physically abusing them, psychologically breaking them down. Daniel decided to report it. He contacted Kenneth Pryor for advice. Then he arranged to meet Carter Ashford to confront him directly. That meeting, behind the library, was the last time anyone saw Daniel alive. Carter and two other students took Daniel into the woods. They tried to intimidate him into staying silent. When he refused, they killed him. They buried his body somewhere in the forest. They never told anyone where. For 30 years, Carter Ashford lived with that secret. He built a career. He became powerful. He used his position to make sure the case stayed buried. But secrets do not stay buried forever. The trial lasted 3 months. In the end, Carter Ashford was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison. The two other students involved were also convicted. One received 20 years. The other received 15. But Daniel's body was never found. The police searched the woods behind the campus. They brought in cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, forensic teams. Nothing. Carter Ashford refused to say where he had buried Daniel. He said he did not remember. He said it had been too long. I think he remembered. I think he just wanted to keep that one last piece of control. Garrett Cross attended every day of the trial. When the verdict was read, he did not react. He just sat there, hands folded, staring straight ahead. After it was over, I met him outside the courthouse. He said, "Thank you. You gave me something I did not think I would ever have. Justice." I said, "I am sorry we could not bring Daniel home." He said, "You gave me the truth. That is more than I had before. That has to be enough." We shook hands. Then he walked away. I stood there for a long time, watching people leave the courthouse. Families, reporters, lawyers. And I thought about all the cases I had worked, all the families I had met, all the stories I had uncovered. Some of them ended with bodies recovered. Some ended with convictions. Some ended with nothing but unanswered questions. But every single one of them mattered. Every single person who disappeared deserved to be searched for. Every family deserved to know the truth. That was the work. That was the promise. And I was not done yet. The Daniel Cross case changed something in me. Maybe it was because we got justice without recovering the body. Maybe it was because Margaret Lyle had carried that secret for 30 years and finally found the courage to speak. Or maybe it was because I realized that the truth does not always come wrapped in closure. Sometimes it comes in pieces. Sometimes you get answers, but not endings. And sometimes that has to be enough. After the trial ended, the team and I took a few weeks to regroup. We had been working non-stop for months. We needed rest. We needed space to process what we had seen and heard. But the calls kept coming. Families who had read about the Daniel Cross case, people who had been told their loved ones were gone and there was nothing more to be done. They reached out because they believed we might be different, that we might care enough to keep looking. We could not take every case. We did not have the resources, but we tried to respond to everyone. We tried to at least point them in the right direction. One call stood out. It came in late January. The caller was a woman named Diane Foster. She said her sister had disappeared 15 years ago. The police had investigated. They had declared it a cold case. No suspects, no leads. Diane said, "I know you must get a lot of calls like this. I know my sister's case is not special, but I just need to know someone still cares. I need to know someone is still looking." Her voice broke on the last word. I told her to send me the file. I told her we would review it. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived. Inside were copies of police reports, news clippings, photographs, and a handwritten letter from Diane, explaining everything she remembered. Her sister's name was Laura Foster. She was 28 years old when she disappeared. She worked as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm. She lived alone in a garden apartment in a quiet neighborhood. On the evening of November 7th, Laura left work at her usual time, around 5:30. Co-workers saw her get into her car. Security footage from the parking garage showed her driving out at 5:42. She never made it home. Her car was found 2 days later in the parking lot of a shopping center about 10 miles from her apartment. The car was locked. Her purse was inside. Her phone was inside. There was no sign of struggle. The police investigated. They interviewed her co-workers, her friends, her family. They searched her apartment. They reviewed her financial records. They checked her phone and computer. Nothing pointed to foul play. Nothing pointed to a reason she would disappear. The case went cold. Diane had spent 15 years searching for answers. She had hired private investigators. She had posted on missing person forums. She had kept her sister's case alive on social media. But she had never found anything. I shared the case with the team. Dr. Tran said, 15 years is a long time. If there was physical evidence, it is probably gone by now. But that does not mean we cannot find answers. It just means we have to look at what we do have differently. Eugene said, the car is the key. She got into her car at work. The car was found at a shopping center. Either she drove there herself, or someone moved the car after taking her. Rachel said, if someone moved the car, they would have needed her keys. The keys were found in her purse, which was locked inside the car. So either she drove there herself, or whoever took her had access to her keys and put them back. I said, or she met someone at the shopping center, someone she trusted, someone who convinced her to leave her car and go with them. That felt like the most likely scenario. I started by mapping out Laura's life in the weeks before she disappeared. I went through her phone records, her credit card statements, her calendar. Most of it was routine. Work, grocery store, gas station, a few dinners with friends. But there was one entry that stood out. On November 2nd, 5 days before she disappeared, Laura had written in her planner, meeting, 7 p.m., Coffee Point. Coffee Point was a small cafe near her apartment. I looked up the phone records for that day. Laura had received a call at 4018 in the afternoon from a number that was not in her contacts. I ran the number. It came back to a business line for a legal office. The office was called Brennan Legal Solutions. My stomach tightened. I called Rachel. I said, Laura Foster had contact with a legal office called Brennan Legal Solutions 5 days before she disappeared. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Kyle Brennan. I said, it has to be connected. It cannot be a coincidence. Rachel said, Kyle Brennan was convicted in the Emily Voss case. He is in federal prison. But if he was running operations under different names for years, there could be other victims, other cases we do not know about. I said, I need to find out what Laura's connection was to that office, why she was meeting with them. I contacted the legal office. The number was still active. A receptionist answered. I asked to speak to someone about a case involving Laura Foster from 15 years ago. The receptionist said, I am sorry, but I have only been here for 2 years. I do not have access to files that old. You would need to speak with the owner. I asked who the owner was. She said, Mr. Brennan, that he has not been active with the firm for several years. I asked if there were any other attorneys who had been with the firm back then. She checked. She said, there is one paralegal who has been here since the beginning. Her name is Sandra Emery. I can transfer you. Sandra Emery answered. She sounded older, tired. I explained that I was investigating the disappearance of Laura Foster and that I believed Laura had been in contact with the office in November 15 years ago. Sandra was quiet. Then she said, I remember that name, Laura Foster. She came in for a consultation. I asked what the consultation was about. Sandra hesitated. Then she said, she wanted to report something. She said she had information about financial irregularities at the company where she worked. She thought someone was embezzling. She wanted legal advice on how to proceed. I asked, what did you tell her? Sandra said, I told her we could help. Mr. Brennan handled those kinds of cases. I set up a meeting for her. I asked, did the meeting happen? Sandra said, I do not know. I scheduled it for November 7th, but I do not remember if she showed up. And shortly after that, Mr. Brennan closed that location and moved everything to a different office. I lost track of a lot of files during the transition. November 7th, the day Laura disappeared. I asked, do you remember anything else about Lara? Anything she said? Sandra thought for a moment. Then she said, she seemed nervous. She said she was worried about retaliation. She said the people involved had connections. She asked if we could guarantee her safety. I asked, What did you say? Sandra said, I assured her that we would handle everything confidentially, that she would be protected. But I do not think I really understood how serious it was. Not until later. I asked, what do you mean, not until later? Sandra said, a few months after Laura disappeared, I found a file in Mr. Brennan's office. It had her name on it. Inside were notes about the company she worked for. Names, financial records, and a note that said, handled. No further action required. I felt cold. I said, do you still have that file? Sandra said, no. When Mr. Brennan left, he took all his personal files. I never saw them again. I asked, did you tell the police about this? Sandra said, no. I did not know Laura had disappeared until years later, and by then, I thought it was too late. I thought no one would believe me. I said, I believe you. I thanked her and hung up. I called Rachel immediately. I told her what I had learned. Rachel said, if Carl Brennan was involved in Laura's disappearance, we need to confront him. But he is not going to talk unless we have leverage. I said, what kind of leverage? Rachel said, if we can connect Laura's case to the other cases he was involved in, we can use that to pressure him. He is already serving life. But if we can prove he was involved in additional murders, it changes things. It opens the door to additional charges, federal charges. I said, how do we prove it? Rachel said, we start by finding out who Laura was going to report. If Carl Brennan was connected to those people, that is our link. I went back to Laura's files. I looked at the company where she worked. It was a small accounting firm called Parker and Associates. I searched for information about the firm. It had closed down about 10 years ago. The owner, a man named Gregory Parker, had retired. I found an address for Gregory Parker. He was still alive, living in a retirement community about an hour away. I drove out to see him. Gregory Parker was in his 70s. He lived in a small cottage with a view of a golf course. He invited me in and offered me coffee. I explained that I was investigating the disappearance of Laura Foster, who had worked for him 15 years ago. He nodded. He said, I remember Laura. She was a good employee, very detail-oriented. Her disappearance was a shock. I asked if he remembered anything unusual happening at the firm around the time she disappeared. He thought for a moment. Then he said, there was an audit that year. The IRS was reviewing our books. Laura was helping me prepare the records. She found some discrepancies. I asked, what kind of discrepancies? He said, payments that did not match invoices, transfers that were not properly documented. It looked like someone had been moving money around in ways that were not quite legal. I asked, who? He said, one of my clients, a real estate developer named Richard Ternan. My heart stopped. I said, Tiernan, as in Ternan Holdings? Gregory looked surprised. He said, yes. How did you know? I said, Richard Tiernan is connected to other cases I have worked on. Cases involving murder and cover-ups. Gregory's face went pale. He said, are you saying Laura was killed because of what she found? I said, I think so. I think she went to Carl Brennan for help, and Carl Brennan was working for Tiernan. Instead of protecting her, He made sure she disappeared. Gregory sat back in his chair. He looked shaken. He said, "I should have seen it. I should have protected her." I said, "It is not your fault, but I need your help now. Do you still have records from that audit?" He said, "Some of them. I kept copies when I closed the firm. They are in storage." I asked if I could see them. He agreed. We drove to a storage facility. Gregory unlocked a unit filled with boxes. We spent the next 2 hours going through files. Finally, we found what we were looking for. A folder labeled Tenon Holdings. Inside were financial records showing payments to shell companies, transfers to offshore accounts, invoices that did not match any real services, and a handwritten note from Laura. It said, "These transactions are fraudulent. Someone is laundering money. I need to report this." I took photos of everything. Then I contacted Rachel. I sent her the photos. I told her what I had found. She said, "This is enough. This connects Laura Foster to Tiernan Holdings, and Tiernan Holdings to Carl Brennan. We can use this to reopen Laura's case as a homicide." I said, "What about her body?" Rachel said, "If Carl Brennan knows where she is, this might be enough to make him talk. Let me arrange an interview." It took a week to set up. Carl Brennan was in federal prison in another state. Rachel and I flew out to meet with him. The prison was grey and cold. We went through security. We were led to a small interview room. Carl Brennan was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit. He was older now, thinner. His hair was greying. He sat down across from us. He did not say anything. Rachel laid out the evidence. She showed him the financial records. She showed him the note from Laura. She explained that we knew he had been working with Tiernan Holdings, that we knew Laura had come to him for help, that we knew he had been involved in her disappearance. Kyle listened without expression. Then Rachel said, "You are already serving life. But if you cooperate, if you tell us what happened to Laura Foster, we can make sure her family gets closure. We can make sure she is not forgotten." Kyle was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do I get?" Rachel said, "Nothing. You get nothing. But you get to do one decent thing. You get to tell the truth." Kyle stared at her. Then he looked at me. He said, "You are the one from Greyport, the one who brought down Cobb." I said, "Yes." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "Laura Foster came to me because she thought I could help her. She thought I was a lawyer who fought for people. She did not know I was working for Tiernan. She did not know I was part of the problem." I asked, "What did you do?" He said, "I told Tiernan that Laura had evidence. He told me to handle it. So I set up a meeting with her. I told her to meet me at a shopping center. I said we would go somewhere private to discuss her case. She trusted me. She got into my car, and I drove her to a warehouse." My chest tightened. Carl said, "Tiernan's people were waiting there. They questioned her. They wanted to know who else she had told. She said no one. I do not think they believed her. They kept her there for a few hours. Then they killed her." I asked, "Where is she?" Carl said, They buried her in a construction site, a development project that was being built at the time. The foundation was poured the next day. She is under concrete now. She has been there for 15 years. I felt sick. Rachel asked, "Which construction site?" Kyle gave us the address. It was a commercial building on the east side of the city, an office complex that had been completed years ago. Rachel said, "We will verify this. If you are lying, there will be consequences." Kyle said, "I am not lying. I have carried this for 15 years. I am tired of carrying it." We left the prison. Rachel contacted the local police. They obtained a warrant to excavate the site. It took weeks to coordinate. The building had to be partially demolished to access the foundation. But they found her. Laura Foster's remains were recovered from beneath 3 feet of concrete. Forensic analysis confirmed her identity. Diane Foster was notified. I was with her when the police told her. She did not cry. She just closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she said, "Thank you. Thank you for not giving up." Carl Brennan was charged with Laura's murder. He pleaded guilty. He received an additional life sentence. Richard Tiernan, who had been serving time for crimes related to the Emily Voss case, was also charged in connection with Laura's death. He was convicted and received an additional 30 years. The case was closed. But I thought about Laura for a long time after. I thought about how she had tried to do the right thing, how she had trusted the wrong person, how her life had been taken because she wanted to expose the truth. And I thought about how many other people like her were out there, people who disappeared because they saw something, because they knew something, because they tried to speak up. That is the work, finding them, telling their stories, making sure they are not forgotten. Laura Foster was 28 years old. She worked as a bookkeeper. She loved hiking and reading and spending time with her sister. And she was murdered because she refused to stay silent. Her story is told now. Her family has answers. Her body has been recovered and laid to rest. That is not enough. It will never be enough. But it is something. And sometimes, something is all we can give. The rain is still falling as I finish writing this. I can hear it on the roof. Steady, relentless. The same rain that falls on coastlines and mountains and cities where people have disappeared. The same rain that will keep falling long after these cases are closed. But as long as there are families searching, as long as there are questions unanswered, I will keep doing this work. I will keep diving into cold water. I will keep walking into warehouses. I will keep asking questions that no one wants to answer. Because the truth matters. Because every person who disappears deserves to be found. Because silence protects the guilty. And because someone has to refuse to let go. That is the promise. That is the work. And I am not done yet.